Hello, my name's Jack Nissan. I'm the director of the Tinderbox Collective, and this was a conversation that I had with Dougie Irvine, who's the artistic director of Visible Fictions. And we were talking about games, theatre, and hybrid environments. And it's part of a series of conversations that I've been having recently for the Tinderbox PlayAway Festival about games and gaming with a range of different people, looking kind of more broadly, I guess, at games and creativity and how people have been using online environments during the pandemic, and also looking for some of the crossovers between how people work in real life settings and how people work in games and online gaming world too. So I hope you enjoy the conversation, and I'll pass you over to Dougie to take it on from here.
I'm Dougie Irvine. I'm the Artistic Director of Visible Fictions. We're an RFO organisation funded by Creative Scotland based in Glasgow. We focus on work for children, young people and families. We started off very much as a theatre company. That was very much our drive when we were founded 30 years ago. But as time has gone on, cross-art form work was of great interest to us as a theatre company. So whether that was puppet work, whether it was digital broadcast work, engaged in live performance, whether that was Foley artistry done live on stage, interaction with performers, a whole range of things. And as time's gone on, that kind of diversification and interest in diverse art forms in our work started to expand. And then it started to expand much more into site responsive work as well as this cross art form. So it's a real range of things. There was a piece, and I think this might be potentially pertinent to discussion, Jack, which was a piece that we created a few years ago called The Hidden, which was a project that was it started with first of all, it was two conversations that kind of came together, which is why I'm interested by what you're doing here at the festival and just where conversations can lead. And it started when I had a conversation with a games maker. He originally was making interactive games, not necessarily online, but personal interactive games. And I was really interested in how you might make a theatre piece have gaming or playing a game somewhere at the heart of it. And so that conversation had been happening with Cameron Hall, a brilliant artist that had been working over there on this side. And at the same time, we were having conversations with a public library who wanted us to help engage teenagers in their public library work. They recognized that engaging teens was really difficult, to say that libraries are sexy and cool. And so they wondered, they'd seen a lot of our site responsive work in the parks, we did some stuff on the Tall Ship, other things like this, that they were like, what you're really great is getting people interested in the space as well as exploring a narrative. So that conversation was happening, and through those two conversations, I went, what happens if they come together? So we then created a game / interactive drama that happens in a public library, where the participant is also the lead protagonist, and they have a mission in the library that happens while the rest of the public are there, and they have a mission in which to try and deliver something and make something happen. Of course, there's lots of intrigue and drama and mystery that start to get connected to the material they start sourcing in the library that's connected to this mystery. And lots of people who've taken part, and this is teenagers and also lots of adults, but a lot of them start to talk about that they feel a bit like they're in a Dan Brown novel or a James Bond film, because they suddenly go, I'm not sure who I can trust anymore and who's involved and who's not. And they start to get a little suspicious because they get so engaged in the game and the participation of the project. But it's fascinating watching them. And of course, they realize, oh, this is the game. And it's what's fascinating, I find it really fascinating, is not only watching teenagers completely hooked by the lure, but we've seen like 60, 70-year-old women running around libraries so excited, giggling about the participation element and the game that they're playing and how they go off to unlock this story that through the information they discover in the books, they start to build, and they start to build narrative themselves. That's part of the key. Part of the whole drive of the project is to encourage meaning making and story making from the participant based on what they find out. And our team start to help them in a dramatic context, in a dramatic framework, to make that unfold.
what's the impact of that compared to other kinds of theatre, which are maybe, I don't know, a little bit more, or what does that kind of
It's a
interaction add
great
to it,
question.
or take away from it, I guess?
It's a great question. I mean, I think one of the things that I think what I hear people talk about when they do it, because of course I've never done it because I can't, because I know how it works. Does that make sense? I know exactly what's happening. Um, but what I find fascinating is that people talk about the emotional level of engagement they get, because suddenly, as in when you play a game, it's your narrative that you're unfolding. In a play, of course, we watch it and we empathize and we connect to the lead characters and we follow the story. That's how great stories work, of course. You know, we root for those characters. But what I find fascinating about something like The Hidden is that not only are you worried about the key character in the narrative, but suddenly you are part of the narrative, and you fundamentally therefore have an emotional stake in not only what is happening to that character, but what might happen to you. And you don't know, you anything could happen. And there were some times you saw people get very what's the word I want to say, feisty, very emotionally prickly, because they're going, hello, where's this going, what's happening? And of course we're going to keep them safe because we have a responsibility as story makers and experience makers to do that. But they've willingly entered into this possibility that anything might happen. And I think that's why they start to say things like, I feel like I'm in a spy movie, because suddenly they are the spy and they don't know who they can trust. They don't know what they can rely on anymore, which you don't tend to get in traditional theatre. You tend to be very much safely watching it from a distance, whereas something like The Hidden, you're absolutely not. And the show can't exist without the participant. That's the absolute truth of it. Of course, you know, a theatre show could happen with one person, but what happens with this, they're the only active protagonists in this experience are those participants. And that's what I find fascinating about it.
If you thought about gaming outside of an online gaming world, or play, or creativity, how would you describe that in just general theatre making?
Well, I guess for me the similarity might be, in answer to you, as I understand your question, is that when you're playing, there's a real sense of not knowing what's coming next in genuine play.
Yeah.
There's obviously some structure, invariably. You know, even if it's a make-believe, like, you know, cops and robbers game you play as a kid, you know that's the rules. There's cops and there's robbers, and you may recall when you were a child, you'd kind of almost figure out what the drama was before you'd play it. So you had the tram lines, and you'll remember when you were a child, I'm sure, is that sense of when someone starts to break the rules. You go, you can't do that. This is not how cops and robbers works, because everyone sort of is defined, but yet there's still that level of discovery that's going on. And I think that's probably what you're looking for in this sense of when you're playing, when you're making work, or in a game that has play at the heart of it. When you start to feel that unpredictability, but yet certainty around those kind of rules. And rules that you can bend and muck around with, absolutely. But I get the sense that's probably the connection, I think.
Yeah, totally. That made me think a lot about music, actually, and those times when you're rehearsing with a group or a band, or you're rehearsing something, but you're trying to find that moment where it suddenly feels unpredictable in some sense, or sort of like you're all on. There's a moment where it really comes to life.
And I found it fascinating when I used to know a guy who was in the Glasgow Improvisers Orchestra, and just hearing how that was structured. And I was like, what? I'm trying to get my head around how that works, how a group of people, and I'm not being a musician, trying to understand how and then he showed me the score, and I was like, what? This is fantastic. All these curly, twiddly bits and triangle pointing mountain shapes. And I was just like, what's going on? And of course, there's the rules, but within those rules, they can do whatever they need to do.
Yeah,
And that's when it becomes super exciting.
I'm not a theatre maker, but I can imagine actors
They love it.
bouncing off each other in the same kind of way, and
Actors love it.
kind of thing. Yeah,
They love that, especially if and the thing that gets me and surprised me about playful actors, and the really brilliant playful actors, is that you can give them very loose rules, really no rules, hardly any rules or guidance at all, and they go. And I'm just watching them, and that's why I love them. I love actors. I just watch them. And I'm like, how are you finding all this stuff that you're finding when you've been given just a hint of a set of guidance or rules to go and play with? But they go and do it. It's amazing. That's what they seem to be born to do, is to play. And I guess it's no coincidence that the thing on a stage is called a play. Do you know, that's, you know, in its best terms, that's what should be, inverted commas, happening. you know, that sense of unpredictability, of that sense of where could this go within the guidelines, you know.
For you, when you hear the word gaming,
Yeah.
or online, in terms of online gaming, but kind of the gaming world or something like that, what's your first reaction to that?
Well, you see, I'm a PlayStation 4 fan. I love my PlayStation 4, so that's what I automatically think of.
Yeah.
But and I love it. But what's interesting about it, though, for me, and it probably won't surprise you when I tell you this, is that it's the games with narrative or story that really land on me most.
Mm.
And I read some stats. I'm trying to remember the exact figures, but it was something crazy. Like out of all the games that are made for various consoles, it's something like 30% of games are finished. They go right to the end. It's only 30% of the games that are made are actually finished or completed. However, when you bring story into it, it goes up to something like 70%, which I find really fascinating about our need or want to find out what's going to happen next, or if it's told well, what's going to unfold in these guidelines that have been given, and where's it going to go? Is it going to go somewhere unpredictable, or is it, you know, and when it's unpredictable, it's even more exciting. But yeah, I think that's what I automatically think of when I think of gaming, online gaming. And that said, though, there's some great companies. There's a company just now called Swamp Motel. I don't know if we mentioned it when we spoke before. And Swamp Motel have got this great game that's going online at the moment. And I really recommend people, Plymouth Point. They've done a couple of others since, but Plymouth Point was the first one. And it's so much fun that a group of you play together and a story unfolds online through a game that you play together online through Zoom or an equivalent of Zoom Room. And it's really fascinating, absolutely fascinating. But I think there's so much potential from my point of view in what this could be. And I don't know what it could be yet. I've seen versions of it, but I've got a sense that it's a really untapped place that we could really find something exciting.
What would help somebody who doesn't know about, who feels like they don't have a window into online gaming worlds,
Yeah.
sort of make that bridge? Or what worked well for you, what didn't work well? Or...
Oh, that's a great question. Oh, I think it's about, when you play a game itself, I think the key to playing a game is to go, let's find out. Let's be open enough to see where this goes. Because when we think of Christmas time and you take the family out or around the table and you want to bring a board game, as soon as someone is going to go, the game ain't going to work. Do you know what I mean? No one, it's because that lack of engagement, for want of a better word, is just not there. So I think being absolutely, first of all, open to going, what is this? What is this? Let's find out. I think that's going to help enormously. I think, weirdly, what I've discovered, and my partner studied computer game structuring recently and how they tie in with narrative. And what's interesting, of course, there's a lot of terminology around computer games, you know, in terms of platforms and how they all work, etc. But what I start to become aware of is that they all use the same vocabulary, but they're just reconfiguring it in a different way. Do you know? So interestingly, when I look at the hidden, I could absolutely, and I'll not do it here, but I could absolutely say exactly what that game rule is as a game that we all know, but we've given it a very different set of clothing. Cameron and I are currently developing a new interactive theatrical game drama that's going to unfold. We're in the process of making a new one. And what I found really interesting is that when we start to say, oh, it's that game mixed with that game and that game, and you start going, oh yeah, that's what our game is. So suddenly you start to realize that all these games, it's the same, and I don't have the theory of it, but they're just the same set of rules, but with different guises. So, you know, for example, the hot cold game. We've all played the hot cold game when we're children. You know, if you're getting closer, it's hot. If you're going further away, it's cold. So you see the hot cold rule happening in certain computer games. You know, I'm playing The Last of Us at the moment, for those of you who know that computer game. The Last of Us involves you having to sneak past these creatures, and as they come close to you, the noise gets closer, so it becomes hot, and you have to listen and you hear it. So you start to play the hot cold game in The Last of Us. That's basically a game you're playing in, but yet combined with a sneaking past someone game. So you just, and I don't need to have actually complicated game theory to know that, but I just go, oh, that's the game that plays a kid. And so it starts to resonate with me. And so I could do that with the hidden, and I could do that with the new one that we're making. And I find it incredibly useful when I find something that I can just easily relate to as a game I played as a child, but we're putting fancy guys around it. That is the truth of it. I shouldn't say that, but it is the truth. There's lots of not complex, sophisticated decoration around it, but at the heart is a very simple set of processes.
You're somebody who seems to be right in the middle of a lot of this, or so you're playing across all of these worlds at the moment. Where do you think things are going to go with theatre, I guess, and with everything going on? That's a huge question, but
it's a huge question. I think the thing that I find fascinating about theatre is that I think theatre has survived as long as it's survived because what it's absolutely done is found a way to keep evolving and adapting, changing with a time. And every artistic theatrical movement that's come along ultimately never takes away from the fact that an audience sits in a space with someone else who is going to perform it in whatever form. And that goes right back to the days that we were living in caves in some fashion, when people would stand there and act out in whatever level, and the rest of the tribe would sit and watch, right up to our sophisticated, inverted commas, audiences who'll go and watch the grand opera, do you know? So I think theatre will always survive. That's absolutely my bottom line. But the thing that I find fascinating is where the artist will take it after all of this. Now, of course, there could be a complete rebellion where we go, it must just be live because we've hated this stuff so much that we just want something that's live and intimate and just who knows what. That could be one version. But it could also start to ask us lots of other questions as we start to think differently. And of course, there's theatre companies that are making almost like what feels like films on stage because of the way that they are making the live work, because they're being so influenced by the cinematic tradition. And it's fascinating work, absolutely has a place. But of course, there's other artists who have chosen to go, do you know what, I'm going to give you a monologue and it's just me as an actor on my own in the space with you, with nothing stripped away, because we hate all these trappings. And I think the fascinating point for me is, as I say, is just how artists are going to respond to this. And I have no idea how they're going to respond ultimately. But I hope there'll be a really interesting, from my point of view as an artist who's interested in cross art form, I really hope we start to find an interesting way to embrace this new online way of communicating that somehow still stays live, but also brings that somewhere into the performance. I think it could be really fascinating.
Totally.
And I'm not saying that's going to be the best way to make theatre or the right way to make theatre. I don't think there is such a thing. There is just theatre. It's just a way to share stories and connect to each other in a space live. And I remember having having some quite rigorous discussions with artists before about this, and they were terrified of bringing digital art forms into live theatre because they didn't think it was theatre. And I remember someone who contributed to this discussion who said something really brilliant. They went, at one time, this mechanical object called a violin was presented on the stage. And suddenly it was deemed to be, what the heck is that crazy thing you're bringing into performance? But of course, now to see a violin in a piece of theatre is just, there's nothing revolutionary about it. But there was one time that would have been. And so I think that the wonderful thing about human beings is that we can, if we want to, be open enough to embrace those new things, still at the same time being loyal to what's fundamentally important to us and finding a way that they all keep stretching us, keep opening our thinking, but at the same time give us what we need, which is ultimately those connections, ultimately those stories, ultimately those live works of art that are going to so enrich our lives.